Today's podcast includes commentary from a guest speaker. Neither the RIA Compliance Collective nor RIA Compliance Concepts is affiliated with the speaker or the company he or she represents.
Whether your advisory firm has 1 or 5 people, compliance will always be an issue. RIA Compliance Concepts is more than just another service provider. We truly care about seeing our clients prosper. That's why we started our podcast, the RIA Compliance Collective, providing up-to-date compliance guidance. We're passionate about doing our job so you can focus on doing your job. We understand regulatory compliance like the back of our hands, from full-service RIA registration to annual compliance reviews and everything in between. We're here to get you there.
Good morning and welcome to the RIA Compliance Collective. I'm your host, Ivan Barretto, and I've got my co-host with me, Colin O'Brien. How are you doing, Colin?
Doing excellent, sir. How about yourself?
I'm good. So one of the topics of discussion most recently, and is a major issue that a lot of RIA firms have to be aware of, is cybersecurity. What a lot of advisors are doing, they're migrating to more of a cloud-based or maintaining a lot of documentation online for their practice. And obviously this leads to some cybersecurity issues that are particularly important to be aware of when you do make a transition to having a lot of your documentation and a lot of your data online. And it's also, an issue with a lot of major firms and even government agencies. The SEC acknowledged that back in 2016, their database was hacked that contained a lot of public company information. Also, back in 2015, 2016, Experian was hacked, and that was one of the major breaches of client data, and everyone's data was basically exposed at that point. Obviously, several items to focus on when you're talking about cybersecurity, such as proper training of employees, all setting up firewalls, having antivirus software, testing your computer systems, having proper password protection. But now that we're going more to, people are transitioning to the cloud, there's a lot of investment in that. In worldwide services alone, just in this past recent year, it totaled about $153 billion and is expected to grow to $300 billion by 2021. With that being said, we have a special guest with us today that is going to help us navigate through the transition in the cloud and the cybersecurity issues that are involved with that. And his name is Rob Erwin. Now, Rob Erwin is an information security architect working for a top 50 Fortune 500 food and consumer goods company. And he's been doing this for the past couple of years. Prior to that, he has, in his architecture and security career, it's spanned over 16 years in the defense industry. He maintains a certified information system security architect professional designation and a SABSA chartered security architect practitioner designation as well. His most current focus is developing a secure architectures for new cloud-based systems, as well as on-prem migration to the cloud. With that being said, he's with my co-host, Colin O'Brien, today. And Colin is going to go over some of the important terminology for our listeners to understand when we're talking or diving into this topic today. And Colin, what are some of those terms?
Well, a lot of acronyms that a lot of advisors out there, when they're going to the cloud-based system, and the advisors are moving more and more towards this with portability and security. But when they're out there shopping for the correct service, they're probably getting thrown a bunch of terms that they really don't understand. There's a couple of items that are kind of broken down into what type of cloud service there is. The first one being cloud systems infrastructure services, or infrastructure as a service. It's IaaS. This is the base model for mainly for large companies to build their tech infrastructure through a cloud system. This would be infrastructures like Google Compute Engine or Cisco Metapod, and it's kind of a basis for them to bring in developers to build their system. Then you have an application infrastructure service. This is a platform as a service, or PaaS. This is kind of the next level. It helps you integrate a bunch of different programs and manage your operations on an already built infrastructure. This would be a Force.com through the Salesforce program, or Heroku, or Windows Azure. And this is kind of the next level, but it's still kind of customizable, and you need a good tech department to fill in for that. But most popular with our listeners is the cloud application services, or SaaS, software as a service. This is the cloud services like Redtail, Dropbox, Salesforce. And this is what we find most common. It's a little bit of customization. You can build your workflows, you can put in different fields, customizable to the program that you have, but it's kind of what we're seeing most common out there and the easiest to integrate. And all of this, if you're talking to the sales guy and he says business process services or business process as a service, that just encompasses the whole thing. So when you go into a cloud-based system, it's a great tool for the portability of your information and sharing across systems. And there's a conception that it's a fairly secure system. And there's things that an advisor needs to consider when he is selecting a service. And there's some due diligence that they need to do for that. And there's some security issues on that. And Rob, what issues do you think are important for an advisor today to consider when they're picking out selecting a system? I mean, is there any data access risk or instability risk? Or I was wondering if you could add some points on that.
So I try to always tell everyone that there's nothing special about the cloud, right? The cloud is, us security snobs always say, it's just someone else's data center. Cloud offers a lot of benefits. It takes away you needing to know a lot of the underlying management of server architecture and software architecture and updates. But what it doesn't do is take away the need to know all the things you mentioned and you would traditionally do in a traditional data center or on your own system, right? So yes, you have to know who has access to your system, what controls they have in place and how they control it, because they're taking advantage of shared services to give you this benefit, right? So you need to know, how do they manage that? Are you on a shared server? Instability is a big issue, right? Obviously, this is the wild, wild west.
Right.
Very new, relative to technology. Everyone's jumping on. Not everyone is doing it correctly. Not everyone knows how to do it. And so you have to ask lots and lots of questions that you would have traditionally asked, just in a different format to find out. So transparency, all these other things that you would always think about are out there.
Yeah, what risk are you looking for with a cloud provider?
Well, again, we want to see how stable they are, both from, will they still be there doing business with you in 6 months?
Yeah.
To how diligent are they in doing security and providing you the service? And again, lots of people are just converting their normal products to a cloud-based version, and you need to know how they're doing that. Are they doing the underlying infrastructure, or is someone else doing it for them? How are they doing security? Where's your data? Do you own your data? What happens if there is a breach? What are they responsible for? What are you still responsible for? So lots and lots of questions.
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier, that there's some concern of where your data might be, in Mongolia, for all you know. And that could be some ramifications as far as what information you need to store and what privacy regulations are out there.
Yeah, what we have to understand about the cloud, and especially software as a service, they're serving customers everywhere. Mm-hmm. Thus, they're taking advantage of platforms and data centers in various places. So depending on what regulations your industry has on you and you're responsible for, the cloud doesn't take those away. So if you have FISMA regulations or SOX regulations or HIPAA, you need to know where your data is and be able to answer to audits to those. So for the cloud, if you, for instance, have data that falls under FISMA, you need to know from your software as a service vendor if their cloud infrastructure spreads your data across any data centers outside the United States. If you're doing business in Europe, there are privacy and data laws specific to Europe that says certain pieces of data have to remain in data centers within the EU. So you have to ask the questions. Other things is where are they actually storing the data and what protections there are on them? So you have to ask all these questions and be diligent about getting answers back from them.
Are there some forms that you can ask for? I thought we talked about the SOX.
Yes. One of the things is, and we mentioned it very briefly just a second ago, is transparency. Mm-hmm. And this is a new industry, and a lot of people just jumping in are hesitant to answer questions, either rightly or wrongly. And so if you start asking questions and they're not able to answer them, one of the good ways to kind of cut to the chase is ask them for what certifications that they might have to show their compliance with different things. So for instance, you mentioned SOC. There's a SOC 1 compliance that vendors can do that relates to the financial industry that shows they're meeting things that will help you know if they're more SOX compliant. There's a SOC 2 compliance that goes even farther to show how they're doing the underlying. And while those don't guarantee, they show they've at least done some work minimally to get to a level of assurance. There are others. There's a new organization, fairly new, called the Cloud Security Alliance, and they are trying to put out guidelines and standards for both practitioners like myself and vendors and providers. And so you can find out if they've gotten a STAR certification from the Cloud Security Alliance. That one basically shows that they're doing all they need to do within the cloud to provide security to their customers. And so if they can show you any of those type of certifications or compliance audits that, they meet the standard, it at least gives you one level more of understanding of what they're doing for you in the background.
Oh, excellent. So that's just one way to establish that, yes, they are providing security for your data. Another issue that, and Ivan, I know that you had a story about this of, do you actually have control over your data?
Yeah, I had a client or a few clients approach me with concerns about their data. And, basically they were leaving the platform, and lo and behold, when they discussed leaving the platform, and obviously with our registered investment advisors, they have a books and records requirement that they have to maintain copies of their records for a period of 5 years. He was inquiring about his data file, and lo and behold, when he decided to move on from this provider, they basically came up with this hefty price tag to get his archivable data file. And I was just curious, Rob, in your experience, is this kind of a common practice in the industry? And if so, is there anything that they can do to be proactive into making sure that they have copies of their data where they don't have to go back to the vendor and, try to get an archivable file?
So it's not necessarily common across the whole industry, but I've heard many examples in the financial industry where this is the case. And I think it's because, one, the industry is new, and the financial industry does have more regulations on having their data. And so the safeguard you have against that, and that doesn't go just on ownership of data, but all the other controls and things you have to worry about, is you must read your terms of service and your contract, because that's where these things are usually buried in. And so you must know what's going to happen if you decide to leave, or if you need to download it for some reason, or if they just suddenly go out of business, where are you going to access your data? Very important things to understand each of those points and press them on if you don't understand. The thing of it is as the industry grows, there are companies now that are allowing kind of a hybrid situation of your data's there, but they also allow certain offloading to offline systems that you are responsible for, right? So it's very important to check on that. If it's not there, ask. And that's what I always say. Do your due diligence, ask, and don't accept no for an answer, or maybe look for another vendor.
You just got to suffer going through reading the exciting terms and conditions of a contract.
Unfortunately, yes.
That's interesting that you mentioned due diligence. As far as when you're working with vendors, kind of segueing into that, once you get a vendor and you've decided to use them, how often do you recommend that, you go back and look at the arrangement with them?
Like anything else, you should at least review where you're at with any vendor once a year, annually. But what I'll try to say, with the regulations changing the way they are today, and this is a new industry, you should be aware of your own regulations within your industry. And if there's a major change, For instance, if the GDPR and EU suddenly puts out more detailed guidelines for compliance, you should take any situational thing like that and go review and then re-ask the question. Are they able to meet the new guidelines? So at least annually, if there's a major change that affects you, you should go back and review.
That should probably be part of all in all the advisory annual review, to not only look at the regulations in the finance world, but to see if there's any privacy regulations out there that they could be tripping up. But the EU is the perfect example with the new regulations that came down the pipeline just a couple of months ago, earlier this year. But there's a lot of solutions out there, and having a good set of procedures in place is a good start. You can sit there and make sure that you have your cyber insurance, that it covers your program, it covers your employees, and make sure that it encompasses all your activities, and that your vendor due diligence is a standardized but amendable program that you look at on a regular basis. You do not only your initial due diligence, but your annual due diligence on there. And Rob, we're looking at getting stuff like a SOX 1 or SOX 2 report, your contact information for that firm, making sure that they have the business continuity plan, correct? And a succession plan if the company's bought out, and several different other items. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're going to the cloud-based system.
And I will just add on that, for your steps you take, never assume security. Ask, verify, get validation. As far as cyber insurance, very important, but always remember cyber insurance doesn't compensate for your loss of reputation. Again, which is why you want to do your due diligence. And you should always ask questions, and any lack of transparency, while it may sound good, is always a red flag. So lots of questions, do your research.
Those are some really good points. Ivan, do you have anything?
No, I think that's great. And thank you so much, Rob, for giving us your insight. And thank you, Colin, for setting up, this podcast with Rob. Very good information. And thank you, everyone that's listening to the podcast. And remember, we're here to get you there.
Thank you for listening to the RIA Compliance Collective. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you want to experience the RIA Compliance Concepts difference yourself, visit RIACC.io. From mock audits to customized compliance procedures, ongoing compliance assistance, and beyond. We're here for you always. Keep listening to discover more on how you can keep your advisory firm compliant so you can focus on achieving your goals. RIA Compliance Concepts. We're here to get you there.